Welcome to my 5th grade presentation from Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition to Pathfinder 2nd edition. An easy transition. So we're gonna start off with, similarities, things you don't need to rack your brain about too much. First of all, 2nd edition Pathfinder is a d20 system. Anytime you want to do something other than rolling damage or such, you're rolling a d20. Skill checks, attack rolls, saving throws, all that normal stuff is with a d20. Each tile still represents a 5 foot square. There might be a little bit difference in speed and movement and stuff, but the tiles are 5 foot squares. Um, there's still general fantasy vibes, so you can go for other things, of course, but it's still fantasy feelings. And the core concepts and basic TTRPG aspects, you still got armor class, saving throws, attack rolls. They're calculated differently, but just the basics are there. Like, you understand what an attack roll is, you'll understand here. So differences is a lot more, as you can see, and we're going to go through all of these individually because the differences make up a lot more of an issue than the similarities do, because it's different, and that's what you gotta learn. So starting off with XP, you're used to it just going up and up and up and up, and once you hit certain number points, that's when you level up. In this edition, it goes from 0 to 1,000. Once you get to 1,000 XP, you level up. And then you go back to 0 XP. And that's what it's like for every level. So every encounter, the XP split is the calculation has to do with how hard the monster is to fight, how many players there are, and how high level those players are. And you earn anywhere from 40 to 120 XP per encounter, per trap, per whatever the DM wants to give you. Obviously, you can still do milestone leveling. I don't know what Xander is going to do, but this is just on the table of how XP works in this edition. Sheet calculations are coming up next. Pretty simply, you add your level to almost everything. You don't add your level to damage, but anything that you would have proficiency in, you would add your level to. So, a level 4 character that is trained in a skill gets a +4 to that, whereas a level 20 character that's trained in the same skill has a +20 to that. Plus, whatever appropriate ability score modifier would be applicable. So if it's a thievery check, they'd have to add their dexterity. They would also have their other proficiency bonuses depending on if they're trained, expert, mastery, but we'll get to that. So it goes up more than just by level, but you do add your level to everything other than damage, pretty much. So, as I was saying, there are trained levels. You start as untrained, where you add nothing to a skill. Basically, you roll a d20 and you add the correct ability modifier. So, if you make an athletics check untrained, you just add your strength mod. But if you are trained in a skill, which is pretty easy to become trained in a skill, you add your level +2, plus, if you become trained in athletics, you add your strength, you add your level, and you add 2. So at level 1, you're basically adding your strength +3 to your athletics rolls. You then expert, you add your level +4. Expert, you can start achieving at about level 5, unless no, you can start achieving them at level 3 unless you're a rogue or an investigator. Then I believe you can start achieving it at level 2. Then at master, anyone could start achieving that at, I believe, level 7. Maybe rogues can get it at level 6. I'm not quite sure about that. And then, legendary comes much later. Like, you don't get that until, like, level 15 or something like that. Crazy stuff, Alright, moving on. So your hit points, you don't really roll for hit points, and you'll see a theme in this new system where it doesn't take a lot of randomness into account. You don't roll for hit points, you don't roll for stats, just because you will fall behind the rest of the party. Instead, if you would normally roll a d8 in other editions, you just add 8 hit points. There's also ancestry HP depending on whether you pick a dwarf or a little sprite. You get an amount of HP, I should say. So dwarves get like 10 HP, elves get 6, most ancestries get 8, like humans, halflings, other things like that. They get 8. So it ranges from 6 to 10, and then I believe there is one orc feat that makes them get 12. But that only matters in the early game because your HP starts to stack up very quickly. So like I said, you don't roll for stats, but there is a point buy that actually gets you better stats than 46 drop one or whatever. I'm sure people have homebrewed rolling for stats in this edition where the point buy comes out about the same if you're really interested in randomness. But I don't think that would work very well for the updates coming out. But yeah, we'll talk about that later. Um, so you get an ancestry boost where, depending on your ancestry, you get some bonuses to stats. So humans, for example, just get a +2 to any 2 stats. Whereas most other ancestries, dwarf for example, get a +2 to 2 stats, specifically Constitution and Wisdom, and then another +2 to any other of the 4 stats, and then a -2 to a stat, in Dwarf's case, Charisma. However, that doesn't mean a dwarf can't be a good bard, because any ancestry, no matter what their normal stat array is, can choose a variant rule, which allows them to just take a +2 to 2 things. So they lose the having 3 opportunities to get a bonus stat, and the negative stat in exchange for a little bit of more versatility. So that's just a choice you can make a character creation. Your background gives you an ability boost. 2 of them actually. One of them has to be a specific skill, 1 out of 2, and one of them has to be any skill other than the ones you selected. Then you get a class boost. This will always just be 1 skill, but different classes can select different boosts, and some classes can't. So for example, a wizard's class boost will always be intelligence, but a fighter's stat boost could be strength or dexterity. And lastly, you get 4 free boosts, where you get to pick any 4 of the stats and increase them. At any of these 4 stages, you can't double up, so you can't put 2 ancestry boosts in strength. You can only put 1 in strength, and you have to put the other one in something else. Same with background. It won't be a problem for class because you only get 1 boost from class, and same for your free boost. So on your free boost, you can't put all 4 points into Constitution. You can put 1 into Constitution, and 1 into Dexterity, and 1 into Strength, and 1 into Wisdom. Something like that. And so this is what it would look like at the end of the day. You see the Ancestry boost, you get a boost to Wisdom, a boost to Strength, and then in the background boost, it's like a new little vertical column, but not vertical or a column. It's a row, horizontal. How about that? Constitution and Strength. Class boost, Strength. So you can have strength in multiple slots, but just not in the same row. And then down here, we filled out the rest of the character, and these are the stats you come out with. Each boost gives you a +2 to a score or a +1 to a modifier. In the update that's coming out in November, I think they're getting rid of scores and just going to have modifiers. So, we could talk about that later. So, your classes. Let's talk about pretty much what has changed. So, everyone loves a good old paladin. And 2e doesn't have a paladin. Fancy that. Instead, we do have the equivalent. We have a champion, whose subclass depends on alignment for now. They're actually getting rid of alignment in the big update in November, where the subclass, you just pick it, and that kind of determines your edicts and your tenets and such. But for now, it depends on alignment. Even when you switch to edicts and tenets in the update, they still would be quote-unquote closer to lawful good following those tenets and edicts, or whatever alignment that they shifted towards. But that's just not a thing that will exist anymore, and I'll be happy to talk about that more later. So, if you're lawful good, you're a paladin, you have lawful good. tenets, and edicts. Redeemer is what they call a neutral good champion. A liberator is a chaotic good champion. A tyrant is a lawful evil champion. A desecrator is a neutral evil champion. And lastly, an anti-paladin is a chaotic evil champion. Now, they don't have subclasses currently for lawful neutral, true neutral, or chaotic neutral. Maybe they'll add it in the expansion, maybe they won't. Pretty easy to homebrew, but yeah. Next up, we have the Warlock, the funny cantrips and the invocations. Yeah, we don't have Warlocks. We got Witches though, who has a patron and a familiar who holds their spells, kind of like a wizard has their spell book. The Witch's spells are stored in the familiar. Your familiar kind of functions as like the bridge between you and your patron. And as a result, they have the same roleplay feel as a warlock. However, they don't function a lot like a warlock. They're not a cantrip caster like the warlock is. They're just another prepared caster, closer to like a wizard, but with a more occult feel to them. And they could draw from any of the traditions, but we'll get into traditions later. Don't worry about that. But if you're going for the roleplay feel, Witch has your back. If you're going for the mechanical feel where you want to have strong cantrips, we'll get to that later. Next up, Artificer. Instead of Artificer, we actually have the Inventor, who, as far as I understand it, is just like pretty much exactly what an Artificer is. Not much is different about that. Like, what you would expect is what you get. Obviously, there are mechanical differences because this is a new system, but yeah, this is pretty much a one-to-one, as close as you can get. And then lastly, Blood Hunter. Instead, we have nothing. We don't have the super edgy class. In second edition, we believe anybody can be edgy if they try hard enough. So we don't have a class devoted to it. I'm sure there's plenty of homebrew out there if that's what you care about. But yeah, moving on. New classes, because I know D&D 5th edition is fucking sparse of classes. It's got like, what, 13 for the million bajillion years it's been out? God, that sucks. We also have Alchemist. They do alchemy. They have bombs. They have like healing reagents. They have poisons, other cool stuff like that. Alchemists have notoriously been buffed about 3 times and still are kind of underperforming, but they're cool. I wouldn't recommend them to a new player because on top of underperforming, they're also kind of complex. But hey, who knows? Maybe in the update in November, they'll get some love. I hope they do. Gunslingers. We have an official class. This isn't homebrew. This is 100% baby. I know Xander was saying guns are in early development, and hey, that is a-okay. That is fine. But gunslingers exist. You can be one. That's exactly what you think it would be. We have the Investigator, which is, kind of like a rogue, but more if you wanted to fulfill your Sherlock Holmes power fantasy. Some people live by the rogue, die by the rogue. Some people say Investigator is the breath of fresh air that the rogue desperately needed. They fill similar roles in the party, but go about doing it slightly different ways. I think both are good options. We have the Kineticist, which is like if you wanna roleplay Avatar: The Last Airbender, that's the one you go to. They are like not spellcasters, where they've got like powerful elemental magic that doesn't consume spell slots. It's pretty cool. I like this class a lot. It's the most recent class to come out, and it's my favorite. We've got the Magus. It has some balance problems, and I've heard it's getting a small nerf in the November release. So hopefully they get other buffs to compensate this, because this class is already underperforming. But even if it's underperforming, you can always have a good time with a class no matter what. I mean, people played 5th edition Rangers and had a great time with it. That bitch on Critical Role played like that Trickery Cleric, which was a subclass that everybody thought was ass and trash, and she had a great time with it and even made it kind of good. So, you can make it work. But yeah, if you want to be a spell in one hand and a blade in the other, and there's also archetypes to like have a shield or have a bow and arrow and a spell in the other or whatever. This is the class for you. Oracle. If cleric, how should I put this? Oracle is to cleric as sorcerer is to wizard. Um, they're maybe chosen by a god, but they weren't necessarily acolytes themselves. But that sometimes they're chosen by a force. This also has slightly like a celestial warlock vibes to it, where they're just kind of chosen and didn't necessarily want all this power. They also get curses, and oracles are pretty cool, and they get powerful abilities to compensate their curses. Psychic. This is your cantrip class. It sounds like cantrips are going to be nerfed in the November patch. So hopefully Psychic on its own gets some buffs to compensate that it's a cantrip class. Other than that, it's exactly what you think. It's a caster that casts from the mind. Um, you know, that might be good for stealthing, but it's not as OP as it would be in 5th edition. I'll explain that later. Summoner. You ever wanted to just have an Eidolon? And if you don't know what an Eidolon is, I don't blame you. It's like an animal companion, but magical and summoned. Yeah, this is that class. Their spellcasting progression, much like the Magus, which I didn't mention, is very peculiar. It's closer to a Warlock spellcasting progression, where they only have a few slots, and they increase in level, but don't necessarily increase in, like, at the point where they get 3rd level spell slots, they no longer have 1st level spell slots. They only have a couple 3rd, a couple 2nd. So it's similar to Warlock, not 1-to-1, but that's about how it goes. But summoners make it work, being kind of like half a tank, half a caster-ish type character. They're pretty fun. Swashbucklers. They struggle a little bit from some of the same thing Magus does, but not nearly as much. I'd say Swashbucklers are a ton of fun to play. If you want to play somebody who is like has a lot of bravado on the battlefield, they can really bring that. Then lastly, not lastly, but next we got Thaumaturge, who kind of, they have magical items, and that gives them power. And the items are sometimes cursed. I haven't looked into Thaumaturge, honestly, a whole lot, so if you want advice on Thaumaturge, I would go to online. Thaumaturge is not a class I've been interested in. Personally, it's a little confusing to me. Oh, that was last. Oh, look, I did not animate that. That's cool. Well, we'll start with the change list, I guess. Races and subraces. Huh, more like ancestries and heritages. Am I right? That just kind of gets rid of, like, some more PC lingo. While also, like, what the fuck was a subrace? Honestly, it was a weird word that we all kind of learned and accepted, but looking back, it was kind of weird. So let's look at the changed list of like what they call different races and ancestries and heritages now. So we've got the Aarakocra, which kind of get turned into Strix. It's not really a 1-to-1, but it's kind of like the closest thing you can get, where Strix have kind of like wings on their back. Strix call themselves Atari, um, which is why that little slash is there. Well, everyone else just calls them Strix. Um, take for that what you will. Ganassi, depending on your type of Ganassi, you have different options. So if you're an air Ganassi, you would now be a Sylph. If you're an earth Ganassi, you'd be an Oreed. Fire Ganassi, Ifrit. Water Ganassi, Undyne. Metal Ganassi, Talos. Wood Ganassi, Arande. Or Adande, or Ordained. I don't know which is the correct pronunciation, but one of those. And Asuli is a combo. Usually a combo's the first 4, but sometimes they'll combo in their metal and wood as well. Instead of fairies, we got sprites. Instead of Kenku, we got Tenku. Instead of shifter, we got beastkin. Fairy to sprite is pretty 1-to-1. Shifter to beastkin is pretty close to 1-to-1. Maybe beastkin is a little bit more furry. Kenku to Tengu is a little different. The same feel, but thank God that Tengu don't have that dumb speech impediment that that Kenku have. fuck that, right? That I mean, it's kind of silly for a one shot, but outside of that, not fun stuff in my opinion. Or like a side NPC, sure, but yeah. Tabaxi are now catfolk, and catfolk call themselves Amarans. Um, Yuan-Ti, the closest thing you can get is Vishkanya, which is kind of closer to a humanoid Yuan-Ti, or Nagaji, which is closer, a lot more snakish. And then Triton, you have Azarketi. Well, let's look at the list that we don't have anymore. It's not really a one-to-one for Dragonborns. They just don't really exist. Bugbears neither. Bugbears exist in the world. There's just not an ancestry for it. And I will say anything on the no list could definitely be homebrewed with little to no problem. Well, and by little to no problem, I mean a little bit of problem because homebrewing ancestries is a lot more complicated in this edition because there's ancestry feats that you got to come up with. But surely somebody has done it. Then we got Centaur, which we don't have. Furbolg, which is pretty specific to the whatever setting D&D is in. That I forget right now. Gith don't really have a one-to-one, neither do Goliath. I mean, there's lots of strong races, but nothing quite like a Goliath. Harengon, is that, I don't know even what that is. Is that the rabbit person? Cool. Minotaurs, we don't really have a Minotaur. But like I said, these things exist, especially like Centaur and Minotaur. We could definitely make them into ancestries playable. Satyrs, same thing there. And turtles. Um, yeah, we just don't really have these things. But don't worry, we're about to see a list of all the new things we have. So I can't confirm what's available in Xander's world. I don't know. I talked to him a little bit, but I don't know what is on the yes list and is on the no list. But this is the new list just from the edition. I'll just cover everything, and some of it will be there and some of it won't. So we've got the Fetchling, which is if you come from like the Shadow Plane. That's cool. That's edgy, right? Like I said, anybody in second edition could be a little edgy. We got the Knoll. If you ever wanted to be a hyena, you wanted to be from Lion King, laughing it up about Scar or whatever, the Knoll is the way to go. The Gripply. Typically tree frogs, but I don't see a reason why they couldn't be literally any frog. So if you want to just be a gay little frog on a gay little log, this is your way to go. The Kitsune, of course, if you wanted to be a weeaboo, you could be, they have a feat where they could be half fox, half person, for those trans people out there. They also have, by default, they can take on a fox humanoidish form that's a lot more furry if you're a furry. Love that for you. And a humanoid form to kind of like blend into their environments. And then they also have feats where they can become like just literally a fox for a little bit. Leshies are like, I wrote plant humanoid, but they're actually just like plant spirits that embody a thing. They're not so much a humanoid, as they are a cactus with arms and legs and a face, or any other plant for that matter. Um, don't worry, we have another plant humanoid that's a lot more like human shaped, but technically a plant later. So next we have Ratfolk who call themselves the Isoki, classic rodent humanoid. Nothing really much to say there. Super adorable. I'm playing an Isoki right now in my Thursday game. She's adorable. Venara are monkey humanoids, which, you could argue humans are monkey humanoids, but, whatever. They have a tail, so that's cool. Anati are literally medium spiders. They do have a shapeshifting ability where they can appear like a human, similar to Kitsune. But yeah, they are just medium spiders who can speak and do intelligent, sapient things. It's kind of terrifying. I love it. They're android, which are, as I say, techie synthetic humanoids. I don't know a lot about androids. I don't know a lot about automatons. One's techie with synthetic, one's a construct. What's the difference? You tell me. I don't care. So, flesh warps were created in your mom's basement with some alchemical and magical means. Frankenstein was probably a flesh warp. Frankenstein's monster was, I should say. Frankenstein was a evil man. Garen Um, they are like those are your plant humanoids. You know, they're shaped like a human, but they're like green and maybe have leaves on their elbows or whatever. Yeah, they're biologically immortal, but you know they could still die. They just live forever if they don't die. Shuni are like pug humanoids, not necessarily dog humanoids. They're like mostly pugs, sometimes like boxers or something. I'm sure, you know, if we wanted to roleplay it otherwise, they could be something else, but pretty much all their art is like pugs. Skeletons are skeletons. Yeah. Moving on. Uh, Konrasu. Wow, these things are weird. Look them up. They are like a cosmic force with a consciousness and a wooden exoskeleton, and they don't take on necessarily a humanoid shape. Come to think of it, I'm gonna ask Xander about these because that's honestly kind of a vibe. That Konrasu kind of reflect my gender. Um, Galama are like, you know, I don't know what more to say than what I've written down because they confuse me. Raptor humanoid. They have a wooden mask that's technically part of their face, and they have multiple eyes, and they're scary. And I don't know much more than that. Kashiri, if you had like an equivalent to the elephant person from fifth edition, this is the rhino person. It's like you know, this is like instead of getting Sunny D, you're getting Sunny W. Pop it. You know, if you want to play Pinocchio, that's the way you go. A Shisk is a person who evolved with feathers and then they shed their feathers and kept evolving and now they have feather spines, but they don't have feathers anymore. And it's kind of weird. I don't want to talk about them much more. Dampier, classic, half vampire. You know, you want your dad to be Dracula, but your mom to be a peasant. That's the way you go. Duskwalker, psychopomp influence humanoid. If you don't know what a psychopomp is, that's like the person who guides you from like into your afterlife. Like they you die and they take your soul to the judgment table, and then they take your soul from the judgment table to whatever the judgment table decided. Um, Aphorite. This is like, you know, like tieflings come from hell or Aesmines come from heaven. Aphorites, they come from law, whatever that means. And similarly, Gonzi come from chaos, whatever that means. Reflection is creepy mirror realm humanoid. I don't know much about them. I think they're born out of mirrors or something, and they're disturbing. I don't like them. All right, that was a whole lot to take in, so I understand if you need to take a little break. But moving on, we got backgrounds, and so I put a little background on this. Actually, that looks disgusting. Please take that away. Thank you. Um, so there's a lot of backgrounds instead of just like 2 pages of them. There's a lot. There's campaign specific ones. There's regional ones. There's like general ones. There's so many fucking backgrounds, and they do more in this game than in the other game. They give you a whole feat, a skill feat. Um, and they also give you some proficiencies and 2 skills. Look at that. And some ability boosts, like I mentioned earlier. Backgrounds do so much for you. And they're just a nice flavor to have. Love that. So alignment. So there's a drama that's going away in the next update. And that drama has to do with, you know, Wizards of the Coast. Bye-bye, alignment. Fuck you, Wizards of the Coast. So they're opening, Open RPG Core, which is, Orc for short, which is replacing the OGL. Not replacing. The OGL will still exist and be shitty. But the Orc is like what the OGL used to be. But not run by a shitty company. Thank you, Paizo. Then the next up we got Feats. Yeah. We'll just ignore the rest of that. But there's way more of them, which is good. Who doesn't love a some good feats? It allows for a lot of customization. You're getting feats like pretty much every level, whether it's a skill feat or a class feat or a general feat, anything like that. You're getting a lot of them, and you can customize your character in a lot of different ways. and they don't cost you your ability score increase. You don't have to trade one for the other. You get both. It's so amazing. I hated that system. They decentralized Feats so much in 5th edition, and then they made Feats powerful, so they re-centralized it, but they still hurt your ability score. It was so dumb. So this is kind of what a typical progression looks like up to 7th level, and it would just continue on this way. So at 1st level, you get, like, all of this stuff. Some classes have some subclasses, quote unquote, some don't. This edition doesn't really use that terminology, subclass, but whatever. Some classes get a class feat at level 1, some don't, but everything else you're guaranteed at level 1. And everything else just moves on practically. Some classes have like a slightly different progressions. For example, rogues get a skill feat every level instead of every other level, and other stuff like that. So as you can see, you can increase your skills, you get class features, you get class feats, you get ancestor feats, general feats, skill feats. There's lots of feat. And who doesn't love that? So, speaking of ability score increases, and not having to replace them, we all know what ability scores here. We got a funny little picture here to remind you for those of us who are a little slow. But it happens every 5 levels. You might have saw it in the past one right here. 4 ability boosts. Happens every 5 levels, and you get 4 of them. So if your score is from 6 to 16, your score increases by 2. Or, I guess if we should say if your modifier is -2 to +3, your modifier increases by 1. Because scores are going away. From 18 onwards, it increases by 1. So at 16, you can increase the stat to 18. Or at +3, you can increase the stat to +4. But then at 18, if you increase that stat, it becomes 19. Or +4, you increase that stat, it becomes +4 asterisk. And then if you increase 19, it becomes 20. If you increase +4 asterisk, it becomes +5. But yeah, let's talk about the action economy. No more standard movement or bonus action. Instead, you simply get 3 actions. So, you get 3 actions every turn. Some actions cost 1 action, some action costs 2 actions, some action costs all 3 of your actions. Of course, there are still free actions and reactions. But yeah, in general, every turn you got 3 actions to spend. Different activities take different numbers of actions. And you got the graphic to kind of show you, like, whenever a thing costs actions, it'll have these symbols next to it so you know how many actions it costs. Most common actions are striding and striking, both 1-action activities. Stride is just move up to your land speed. Very different from flying, swimming, climbing, digging, whatever. And striking is just to attack with a weapon. And of course, there's multiple attack penalty, which, kind of discourages you from just making 3 attacks every round. But there's another thing that discourages you from making 3 attacks every round. And that's the multiple attack penalty I was talking about, map. Not everybody gets attacks of opportunity, so you can move around the board so much more freely. I think that's a big improvement. It's a change that I didn't know that I wanted until they gave it to me, and now I don't think I could live otherwise. Everything having attacks of opportunity is scary, and it kind of forces you to stand in one place and beat on the enemy until it's done. But now, attacks of opportunity are kind of difficult to come by. Now, most marshals can take a feat at level 6 and get them. Fighters at level 1 get op attacks for free. So that's kind of one of the incentives to play a fighter. Enemies that have op attacks are usually quite strong. Like that's a denotion of, wow, you don't mess with this guy. He has op attacks. You know what I mean? And any action with the manipulate trait or the move trait provokes op attacks right now. So moving provokes op attacks. Casting certain kinds of spells will provoke op attacks. And we'll get to that more later. Or we'll get to it right now. Hey, look at that, spellcasting. So there are now 4 traditions. Instead of like each class having their spellcasting list, there are 4 traditions. And that's arcane, that's occultism, that's divine, and that's primal. With druids being the primal, clerics being the prime divine, bards being the prime occult, and wizards being the prime arcane. Sorcerers can be any of them, witches can be any of them. It depends on your bloodline or your patron, respectively. But yeah, that's about how it goes. So, a spell that has verbal components has the concentrate trait. A spell with somatic or material components has the manipulate trait. And just like I said, manipulate traits provoke op attacks, so that's good to know. Spontaneous casters typically know less spells. Prepared casters have less spell slots to work with. And oh, prepared casting is weird in this edition. Where you have to prepare specific spells and specific slots. It's complicated, and if any of you decide to play a prepared caster, I will be happy to go over it with you. It's actually not that complicated, but it's definitely a big change from 5th edition. Meta magic feats are available to most casters. They usually cost actions to activate instead of only sorcerers having access to meta magic. But yeah. So miscellaneous, the last few things I want to go through is saving throws. There is not one tied to every ability score. There is a saving throw for reflex, which is tied to dex, fortitude, which is tied to constitution, and will, which is tied to wisdom. If you compare that to 5th edition, those are like your 3 primary saves. And yeah. Other than that, initiative is a skill check. I mean, I guess technically it's a skill check in 5th edition. But it's a skill check in this edition where you roll a skill, usually perception. So initiative is most often affected by your wisdom and your proficiency in perception. However, if you're stealthing up to sneak up on an enemy to get the sneak attack on them, before combat starts, you might roll stealth for initiative. You can roll any skill theoretically, as long as you can, how should I say, tell the DM why it makes sense. And the DM says okay. Multiclassing in this edition works by not limiting your class progression. Instead of taking like 3 levels in wizard and 4 levels in fighter, you are a wizard, and then you still get your wizard progression. You just change one of your class feats to fighter multiclass feat, and so you get a fighter feat at like a very much slower progression. But you still increase your wizard spellcasting and any wizard class features that you would get at that level. So it's a lot more, how should I say, manifesting your, it's a lot more customizable, and you don't feel like you're missing out on your primary class by dipping into another class. So if you get to a level and there's no good class feats at this level, and you have everything you want, you might consider multi-classing or taking an archetype. Because there's nothing else to do with your class feat at that point. And you're not losing your progression. You're not stunting yourself. By multiclassing, you don't limit yourself from eventually getting that level 20 milestone. You'll still get it. Shields in this edition, they don't provide a passive boost to your AC. I won't go into too much in depth about how shields work, because that might change a little bit in the rebalance, but basically you have to spend an action on your turn to raise your shield, and that gives you a bonus to your AC depending on how big and any magical bonuses the shield has. It gives you a different size bonus to your AC, and you can then spend your reaction to block one attack where the shield absorbs some damage, and then you absorb the rest of it. And then, of course, that leads to shields potentially breaking and you not being able to use them for the rest of the combat and then having to repair them later. It's a whole thing. And honestly, I like the system a lot. At first, I was not excited for shields to take an action to be able to use. But you learn pretty quickly that just attacking 3 times is not an effective strategy. So if you spend one action raising your shield, that's way better than making an attack roll with a -10, which is going to almost never hit. So it's actually usually worth it. The next things I want to talk about is exploration activities. They might add more, they might change them a little bit, but these are just things you can do when it's not combat, like constantly looking around, scouting, that sort of stuff. Except they are a lot more outlined in this edition so that you can say, I'm scouting, and that means my friends and myself get a +1 to our next initiative roll. Or you can say, I am constantly casting a spell, like the shield spell, for example. And so you start the next combat with the shield spell casted. Um, Same thing with like detecting magic. You're constantly casting detect magic, or maybe you're investigating. You're constantly making perception checks against traps, or maybe you're trying to move without avoid notice, so you're constantly making stealth checks, or under the constant effect of rolling for stealth. Um, yeah. Lastly, nextly, there are 4 results of your d20 rolls. You can either critically fail, succeed, or critically succeed. I don't think that's a weird concept, but the way in which you critically fail, critically succeed is a new concept. If you ever beat a difficulty class by 10 or more, then you critically succeed, even if you rolled a 15 on the die. You came out to like a 25, but the DC was 15. You just crit. Um, Different things have different effects as to what crits do, and that is usually outlined in the ability or spell or whatever. Alternatively, if you lose to a DC, you roll a 2, and you come out to an 8 on a DC 18, you just critically failed, even though you didn't roll a natural 1. And speaking of natural ones, if you ever roll a natural 1, and you treat your roll as 1 degree worse than what it would be. So if you roll a natural 1, but your modifier is so high that you succeed anyway, you actually fail because it's 1 degree worse. If you roll your natural 1 and you would fail, you now critically fail. And if you already are critically failing, well then you can't get any worse than that. And if you somehow critically succeed with a natural 1, you actually only succeed. How sad. And the same works for a d20. If somehow with a d20, natural 20, you fail, you now succeed. If you succeed, you now critically succeed. If you critically fail somehow, you only fail, which, I don't think you should be doing anything where you would critically fail with a natural 20 anyway, but that's neither here nor there. Rarity I've already kind of talked about, but yeah, there's a rarity system. Uncommon is typically ask your DM first. Rare is kind of like, that's usually a quest or something to get, but that's just up to standard to decide. And the last, I want to make some closing notes. It's just like, I tried to cover a lot of mostly broad strokes. There were a few points where I got pretty specific, but I wanted to hit broad strokes just so we understand what this edition is trying to do. That way, when the change comes in November, there's not a whole lot to relearn. But you definitely need to learn like some of the base mechanics that won't be receiving a whole lot of change, and that's kind of what I'm trying to attempt to do here. So hopefully it worked. Hopefully this wasn't too boring. It probably was, but hey, that's how it goes. Ta ta.